Hello everyone, welcome to the MOOC on land tenure and property rights. My name is Yulia Naiman and I am a land tenure and property rights specialist within USAID's Land Tenure and Resource Management Office. Today I will be taking you through an introduction to Tanzania, which will set the stage for the case study that we will be looking at on Tanzania specifically as land rights are explored in that country. So a bit of background on Tanzania itself. Tanzania is a relatively large country in East Africa. Its area is almost 1 million square kilometers. It's got a diverse population of about 45 million people, made up of numerous ethnic and linguistic groups as well as different religious groups. About 70% of the population is rural and lives in rural areas. Tanzania was formerly a German colony prior to World War I, and then was a British colony up until its independence in 1961. Tanzania is incredibly diverse. It has approximately 125 different ethnic groups, and between them they speak about 100 different languages. It's actually the most linguistically diverse country in all of East Africa. Of these groups, there are several minority pastoral groups, including the Maasai and the Luo. Tanzania's economy is largely agrarian. Agriculture employs approximately 80% of the workforce, even though agriculture only accounts for approximately a quarter of the country's GDP. In 2014, GDP per capita was $1,813, which is below the average for sub-Saharan Africa. Between 2009 and 2013, the GDP grew by 3.5% per annum. Of its agricultural outputs for Tanzania, the main ones are coffee, tea, cotton, cashews, and tobacco. Tanzania also produces large amounts of paddy and sugarcane. Like many countries in Africa, Tanzania has a long and interesting history of land governance and land rights reform, dating back to the end of colonization. In 1961, the British attempted to introduce freehold ownership of land in Tanzania. This reform was rejected, and following independence, Tanzania entered a period called African socialism, led by President Julius Nyerere. African socialism was defined by collective cultivation of land. Individual land was transferred to village councils in order for it to be farmed collectively. And a series of laws in the 1960s built a framework where the state, and specifically the president, had ultimate authority to allocate and designate uses of Tanzania's natural resources. These measures didn't bring about the increase in agricultural productivity that was envisioned, and through a series of reforms in the 1980s and 1990s, the collective ownership was scaled back and a series of privatization measures were introduced. The 80s and 90s saw a transition to a legal framework that supports private property rights, while still maintaining the president's control over all natural resources. This framework also recognized customary land rights and promoted private investment. These reforms culminated in 1999 with two parallel laws, the Land Act of 1999 and the Village Land Act of 1999. We will explore both of these laws in a bit more detail further on. However, it's important to note that this legal framework has been more difficult to put in place than anticipated. Implementation is still spotty, especially in rural areas, and often the legal reforms have not been carried out to date. In Tanzania, there are three broad categories of land: village land, reserve land, and general land. Village land is managed by the villages themselves and comprises most of the rural land in Tanzania. Reserve land is, as the name suggests, reserved for conservation and protected areas. The leftover land, a very small percentage of the land in Tanzania, is land owned by the state and used for example, parastatal organizations. As you'll remember, these three areas of land were introduced in the first module. A bit more on these three types of land. Village land accounts for about 70% of the land in Tanzania. Ownership of this land is expressed through a customary, though legally binding, document called a CCRO, or a Certificate of the Customary Right of Occupancy. Village land is governed by the Village Land Act. Reserve land comprises approximately 28% of the land in Tanzania, and general land comprises approximately 2% of the land. Both reserve land and general land are governed by the Land Act of 1999, and ownership of these two types of land is expressed through a formal tenure document called a granted right of occupancy. In practice, most village land, which comprises approximately 70% of the land in Tanzania, is not registered. So what are the key land issues that Tanzania faces today? The first basic issue that predominates throughout the country and underpins many of the subsequent issues we'll be discussing is that the legal property rights framework is weak. Many laws are not enforced, especially at the village level. And land institutions are either non-existent or ill-equipped to handle the demands of land registration. As I mentioned, most village land has not been actually titled. Another large category of note is the issue of women's land rights. By law, men and women have equal rights to land. However, in practice, this is not the case. And you'll hear this issue discussed in further modules because it is not only unique to the Tanzanian context. Inheritance laws and marriage laws often run counter to the concept of equal land rights and work to dispossess women of their rights. Cultural norms also dictate against the ownership of land by women, and many women are either afraid to ask for their land to be registered in their name or don't know how to do it. A third difficulty when it comes to land governance in Tanzania is securing land in the face of increased investment. The government of Tanzania has been working heavily to promote investment in land-based agriculture, including foreign investment, and has designated a corridor of land called the Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor of Tanzania, or SAGCOT, specifically for land-based investment. However, the designation of this corridor, along with the increased attention that the designation has brought, has led to concerns that local landowners whose land is not formally registered may be dispossessed. Increased investment is also driving up land prices, fueling speculation, and increasing pressures on land. All of this is exacerbated by the fact that land is not currently registered, and it's difficult to ascertain who owns what where. Finally, Tanzania faces an issue of pastoral rights to land. There are significant conflicts between farmers and pastoralists, particularly Maasai cattle herders who are semi-nomadic. Increased investment in land in Tanzania is exacerbating these problems. A few more words on land markets in Tanzania and how investment in land is made. In principle, rights of occupancy can be bought, sold, leased, or mortgaged in Tanzania. In practice, however, this is not the case. The land market is quite illiquid and is constrained by many levels of government bureaucracy. It's difficult to go through formal channels to buy or sell land, particularly if you're a foreigner. This creates a very limited formal market in Tanzania for buying and selling land, especially in rural areas where land is not registered to begin with. Most sales are informal, and they're made in villages between family and clan members. The government of Tanzania has tried to alleviate this problem by creating a Tanzania Investment Center, which is geared towards helping investors identify land and navigate the complicated land acquisition process. Still, the acquisition process is so lengthy and complex and bureaucratic that most choose to forego formal channels and acquire land informally, which opens up the possibility for further abuses of land acquisition. So here we get to the most important question that will be addressed in subsequent modules as well. Why are we concerned about land rights in Tanzania? First, we care because the government of Tanzania sees land as a critical constraint to economic growth. Land reform has been identified in several Government of Tanzania initiatives as a key item towards improving investment, both foreign and domestic. The government understands that securing the land rights of local people, as well as making it easier and more transparent for investors to purchase land, is crucial to improving the investment climate. We also care because an important part of improving the investment climate for land-based investments is protecting the rights of smallholders and those who are already living in the area that is targeted for investment. Many initiatives have been criticized for contributing to land grabs by outside private investors. It's important to ensure that such initiatives do not dispossess smallholders and those who are already occupying the land that's slated for investment. We also care because research has shown that land tenure is crucial for economic growth. Having secure ownership of land leads to increased investment in that land and therefore to broader and more sustainable economic outcomes for populations who live on that land. Likewise, land ownership contributes to increased food security and leads to a better allocation of resources to work away from poverty and malnutrition. Increased land tenure security also leads to stronger women's rights and allows women to diversify their incomes. And finally, increased land tenure security has a positive effect on pastoral rights and protects pastoralists and farmers as distinct but cooperative members of society. It reduces conflicts between these groups. So what is USAID doing to address Tanzania's land-related challenges? We currently have two interesting projects that we're involved with. The first is the SARA Policy Project, which is aimed at improving the policy and regulatory environment for agricultural growth in Tanzania. The second is the MAST Pilot Project, which uses cell phone technology to help map property rights and deliver CCROs. Much work has been done, both by the government of Tanzania and by donors like USAID, to improve land governance and land tenure security in Tanzania. However, there is much more that needs to be done on this front, as you will hear from subsequent presentations. Thank you.